Beneath the glass arches of the Prism Gardens, Archdaughter Alara held her breath. She twisted her fingers, coaxing the photons into a physical lattice. The faint, bitter smell of crushed ozone hung in the air, the mundane residue of a prism light weave solidifying into matter. In her palm, a single flower bloomed from pure blue light. It was delicate, useless, a momentary distraction from the cold geometry of Ethelgard. Then, the garden chimes struck the discord note. A royal summons. High Sovereign Solon was waiting at the obsidian throne. Alara crushed the blue flower in her fist. The light shattered into harmless sparks. Protocol dictated a measured walk, but her pulse hammered a frantic, heavy rhythm against her iridescent skin. I'll be honest with you. The history logs call what happened next a diplomatic triumph, but they lie to make it sound clean. A low hum, then nothing. That was the sound of a vacuum sealing over a fresh hull breach. Out in the black expanse near Apex Hub, 20 Krix raiders fell out of slip space. They expected a soft target. They found Commander Silas Thorne. No grand speeches. No demands for surrender. The Revenant simply dropped its heat sinks and accelerated straight into the center of the formation. Silas didn't flinch. His hands moved over the manual thruster controls in a blur of calculated violence. He opened fire with raw, unguided kinetic bombardment. The sheer mathematical impossibility of his vector ripped the first Krix cruiser apart before its shields could cycle. The rest scattered. He hunted them down. The obsidian throne room was freezing. High Sovereign Solon did not look at Alara when she knelt. He stared at the holographic projection dominating the chamber floor. Red markers, thousands of them, pouring out of a region of space no sane navigator touched. The void shallows, Solon stated. His voice was hollow. The Krix swarm has crossed the boundary. Alara stared at the crimson flood on the map. The Krix swarm didn't negotiate. They didn't even leave wreckage, which meant they will be in orbit within the cycle, Solon continued, finally turning to her. Our defensive grids will hold for 12 minutes. We require a deterrent, a species chaotic enough to match them. He brought up a secondary projection, a human warship, ugly, brutal, erupting with kinetic fire. The Human Defense Corps has agreed to position a fleet over Ethelgard, Solon said. But their protection comes with an archaic condition. To ensure our loyalty, they demand a permanent tether, a marriage of necessity. Alara's secondary heart ceased. The humans were barbarians. They fought with fire and metal. Pack your formal regalia, Solon ordered. You leave for Apex Hub immediately. Sparks showered onto the deck plating of Apex Hub's primary docking bay. The Revenant looked more like a piece of shrapnel than a functioning starship. Its port armor was completely charred, venting gas into the sterile station air. A crowd of minor dignitaries and station personnel had gathered behind the security barricades, murmuring in a dozen different languages. They were waiting to see the butcher. The boarding ramp lowered with a rusted shriek. Commander Silas Thorne walked down into the pristine lighting. He wore standard tactical plating, not dress uniform. Ash and dried blood smeared the edge of his jaw. He didn't look like a savior. He looked tired. He looked like a predator scanning a new cage. He ignored the welcoming committee, his dark eyes locking onto the structural stress points of the ceiling above them. External observers called him the Iron Wolf. Not because he bit, because he never let go of the throat. Alara stood in the observation deck above the docking bay, watching him. Her attendants were frantically adjusting the heavy, ceremonial silks draped over her shoulders, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from the human below. She had spent her life studying the elegant flow of prism light architecture, the precise formulas of civilized existence. The man standing on the deck was the antithesis of that geometry. He was a jagged edge. He is unrefined, her lead attendant whispered, chromatophores shifting in pale, nervous ripples. He is a weapon, Alara corrected quietly. She watched Silas Thorne reject a ceremonial chalice from a station governor with a curt shake of his head. He was alert, paranoid. The political marriage was supposed to be a symbolic gesture, a signature on a datapad to release the Human Defense Corps fleet. But watching him scan the crowd, tracking the hands of the station guards, Alara realized the terrifying truth. Solon hadn't just secured a fleet. He had tied her to an active explosive. She gripped the railing, her iridescent skin flaring a deep, resolute violet. The Krix were coming. Ethelgard's elegant towers would burn within the cycle if this alliance failed. She turned away from the glass. "Prepare the formal feast," Alara ordered, her voice finally steady. "And ensure the Krix ambassador's contingent is seated directly across from the commander." The grand dining hall of Apex Hub glittered with suspended light sculptures. Commander Silas Thorne did not sit. He remained standing near the primary blast doors. He was a stark gray anomaly against the iridescent robes of the Ethel nobility. His armor was still scarred. The Krix ambassadorial proxy approached the high table. It was a towering creature of segmented chitin and malice. It carried a crystalline goblet of ceremonial wine, a traditional offering of peace. Silas watched the alien's mandibles click. He observed the slight hesitation in the proxy's gait. He didn't reach for his sidearm. His posture shifted. He leaned slightly forward on the balls of his feet. He was perfectly still. Alara descended the grand staircase. She moved with forced, rigid grace. The heavy ceremonial silks felt like a burial shroud. She kept her eyes locked on the Krix proxy offering the goblet. Her training in prism-light architecture required an eye for microscopic imperfections. She saw it immediately. A faint, oily sheen clung to the rim of the glass. Neurotoxin. The Krix intended to assassinate the human deterrent before the marriage could even be formalized. It would leave Ethelgard completely defenseless. She thought she understood the precise geometry of light. But this human... The proxy hissed. Alara intercepted the alien. She snatched the poison goblet and threw it to the floor. The glass shattered. The liquid burned a smoking hole through the reinforced decking. Alara grabbed Silas's armored forearm. Her iridescent skin flashed violently. "This one is mine," she declared to the stunned room. Silas didn't react to the smoking hole in the floor. He reacted to the deep, structural groan of the station. The alarms triggered a fraction of a second later. Red emergency lighting flooded the dining hall. The Krix hadn't come for a treaty. The proxy was just a distraction. They wanted to eliminate the only tactical threat on the board. The main swarm fleet had arrived. They were pouring out of the void shallows. They outnumbered the defenders 3-1. "The void shallows," Alara whispered. Solon's 12-minute window was already closing. She didn't wait for her royal guards. She ran. She dragged the heavy silks off her shoulders. She abandoned the regalia on the polished floor. The Iron Wolf fell into step beside her. They tore through the maintenance corridors of Apex Hub. The station shook violently. The first kinetic strikes hit the outer shields. Alara knew the Ethelgard defense grids were too delicate for this brute force assault. They needed speed. They needed tactical madness. They reached the docking bay. Silas bypassed the command deck of his crippled ship. He sprinted toward the launch base. The Revenant held 2 twin-engine interceptors. They were stripped down, unarmored, practically flying reactors. Alara climbed into the second interceptor. She had never piloted a human craft. The controls were crude. They lacked any light weave interfaces. But Silas's voice cracked through the local comms channel. He fed her the raw telemetry data. She synchronized her thrusters with his. This was biological synthesis. Ethel precision merging with human aggression. The interceptors blew out of the launch tubes in a silent explosion of thrust. Space was a graveyard. Ethelgard cruisers were burning. Their shields were shattering under the overwhelming numbers of the swarm. Alara pushed the throttle forward. The G-force crushed her chest. A small, rhythmic rattle from a loose ventilation grate in the cockpit of the Revenant echoed over the open comms channel from Silas's ship. A mundane sound completely ignored amidst the carnage of a space battle. They fell into a high-speed suicide burn. Alara mapped the intricate, shifting geometry of the Krix formation. She calculated a path through the lethal crossfire. She fed the vectors to Silas. He executed the maneuvers perfectly. He flew through gaps that barely existed. They breached the inner defense perimeter. The moon-sized Krix flagship loomed ahead. "Now," Silas ordered. Alara initiated the reactor overload sequence. The underlying principle of the detonation was simple physics. Bypassing the primary coolant regulators while simultaneously maintaining full forward thrust didn't just create excessive heat within the engine blocks. It forcibly compressed the energetic particles until the entire propulsion system transformed into a highly unstable, localized singularity that possessed enough sheer explosive yield to shatter heavy armor plating from the inside out. She slammed her interceptor into the flagship's hull. She engaged the ejection pods. They detonated. The explosion was completely silent. The resulting chain reaction tore the Crick's flagship apart from the inside out. It sent a shockwave of shattered chitin and burning metal across the void shallows. The remaining Crick's forces broke formation. They retreated into deep space. The medical bay of the Revenant hummed with the steady thrum of life support. Alara lay on the sterile cot, bruised and exhausted, staring at the ceiling. Resting on her chest was a crude, flickering holographic badge attached to Silas's spare uniform jacket. It was a glowing blue flower, projecting not useless beauty, but the heavy, acknowledged weight of survival.